I love turning boxes. Sometimes they're a challenge, but they're always fun. One thing about boxes is they are always going to call for the use of a scraper for some cut. And the old adage that one size doesn't fit all certainly applies here. What works best for me may not work best for you, but because boxes require scrapers, let's explore some of the options so maybe you can figure out what's the best tool for you. First, let's look at the common box making tasks. The first one is going to be squaring up the inside recess for an overfitting lid. And in this case, for boxes, we're generally talking about a typical standard box, traditional box with an overfitting lid. Makes no difference whether it's a basic cylinder box or whether it's a more elegant looking box like this. You've still got that same challenge of making a parallel, clean recess for the lid. The next task is going to be shaping the flange that lid's going to fit over, and it's got to be parallel. It's got to be smooth, and there are different tools for that task. The next task is cleaning the inside sidewall, and what scraper is appropriate, as we get into more detail, is going to be whether it's more of a straight sidewall or whether it's more of a curved sidewall where you can get back underneath the flange. And then the last task is going to be the one that involves cleaning up the bottom, and what the appropriate scraper for that is going to make a difference between whether you've got a round bottom where you're picking something up with your fingers like that, or whether you've got more of a square corner bottom for a cylinder box, or even a pencil pot for that matter, getting a nice clean corner. First, let's look at that overfitting lid, since that's the best place to start on a typical box. The inside recess is typically going to be somewhere between 5/16 and 3/8 of an inch deep to allow room for that flange. Now, that can vary, but for most of mine, that tends to be what I use. Exceptions might be for friction fitting or piston fitting lids like this, where you can have a much longer fit, but typically 5/16 to 3/8 of an inch. Might be a bit longer if you're doing hand chased threads. So let's go through the various tools we could use to make that inside recess, starting with a carbide tool. Most of y'all that have been watching my videos know that I prefer to use conventional tools for any number of reasons. I think they're more versatile, but they do take there's a little steeper learning curve. But that's certainly a possibility that you could use a square scraper. It just wouldn't necessarily be my choice. I have made a box with scrapers just to verify that I could do it using round and square, but I didn't like it. Didn't like the process. But certainly, it's a scraper, it's square, it'll certainly get the job done. Another option is the beading and parting tool, or a skew. Both of them have a negative rake or two different bevels, but they both share the same common problem for this particular task, and that is, as you try to square up that shoulder, it's very difficult to get a straight cut because the side has a tendency to want to push the edge away. So it's very difficult to get a square, rather parallel shoulder. Can be done, just not a good choice. Some folks like to use a bedan. I do not. It just doesn't resonate with me. But it is certainly a reasonable choice to come in and make this shoulder, because the edge or it tapers down, so you don't have that same issue of the shoulder rubbing and pushing it away. Because if you're cutting slightly above or at center, the edge is not going to rub. So that is a possible choice. But there are other tools I'd prefer. So the tool that I prefer for this choice is a typical box scraper that comes in from the side, has a very slightly radiused left edge, so when it gets into the corner it's not going to grab and it leaves a nicely rounded corner. You can make one of these tools from any number of scrapers. I had one originally made of this shape or similar. It's got a little shallower, a little shorter point, but I made this when I first started making boxes, reground from a Harbor Freight tool, and it works. The reason I didn't like it and moved up to a Robert Sorby is, number one, it was a little bit thicker, a little bit wider, a little meatier, and it was, I got it used, so I only paid half price. But you can certainly make you a box scraper. This particular box scraper, with a very short, no more than an 1/8 inch or so tip, it was traditionally used and called an inside tool for hollowing out the box. You can see this in Alan Batty's video, available on Craft Supply, where he used it to hollow out a box lid. At a recent club demo, Alan Leland demonstrated a tool shaped like this. I tried to model mine after the picture of his, and he called this an Alan Batty box scraper. It has some of the similarities of a traditional box scraper in that the sidewall is taken down, so it doesn't rub and push it away. The front of it is less than a 90-degree curve, and in this particular case it's also a negative rake scrape, which makes it a little less aggressive. Let's use it inside the box. The sample's getting a little smaller. And it can work. I just, after using it just a little bit, I didn't find that it was an improvement over a traditional box scraper. One of the things I didn't like about it was made from a 3/8 inch bar, which was a little less stable than a wider traditional box scraper. It's typically about 3/4 of an inch. Another option is a negative rake scraper with a bevel on the left side, a bevel on the front. This side is ground perfectly parallel with this wall, so you come straight down, and you can use this to help align it. And this is used by Cindy Drozda. That's where I got this example, this style from. And it works very well on refining very small, shallow cuts like this. And I do use this occasionally for some refining cuts, but generally speaking, I find it, for me, just a traditional box scraper seems to work just fine. Although I do use that Cindy Drozda style occasionally with some woods and some boxes where I'm not going very deep, such as in the lid. The next common task is shaping that flange for that typical overfitting box. I tend to make mine about a 1/4 inch long, and I find that most box makers generally use the same tools or variation. So the two tools that are commonly used for this are the ones that did not work on the inside very well for squaring the walls, but for the outside they work great, and that's either a skew or a beating and parting tool. And in my case, most beating and parting tools are 3/8 of an inch. This is a shop made, and it's 5/16 or 8mm, and I like it. And that's what I tend to use most of the time because it's a good fit for me. So I'm going to use this initially in a peeling cut. But you can also go straight in for just taking off small amounts. And a skew does the same task very well. It's really a matter of which one do you prefer to use. And if you prefer a flat carbide scraper, that's certainly an option, because you could come in here and cut that flange with that. You're not going to get as good a surface as you would a negative rake scraper, or for a peeling cut or a scrape on either one of these two. But certainly it can work for you if you prefer using carbide tools. So I'm just going to line it up perpendicular to the lathe bed. And you can get a good result with that if you prefer using a carbide scraper. We're not going to go into any detail on how you do end-grain hollowing for a box. I've got a whole video on that. If you're interested, click on the link above. But generally you're going to use a spindle gouge. And then do some cleanup work with a scraper. So it's getting that sidewall parallel that I want to talk about now, and that's where a traditional box scraper tends to really come into its own. Now, one of my favorite box scrapers is this one by Carter & Son. A couple of reasons. It's thicker and beefier than the Sorby, but it also has a polished top, which makes for a sharper edge. You don't have a serrated bread knife when it comes to the edge, as you do for most other tools, such as the Robert Sorby. So you come down, again, similar to doing the inside of a lid. You're going to use this angle, which is, this is less than 90 degrees. It's angled just a little bit. And the reason why you want to typically do this for at least part of the distance is when you go to reversing the box, you want to have a nice parallel shoulders here for at least 3/8 of an inch in order that you can put this on a jam chuck. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of difference. And it may taper in if the box shape goes in. If you're making a round box, of course, then you're going to use a different scraper on the inside. You're going to use some type of curved scraper, certainly on the bottom. But that inside wall, they're going to be the same for about 3/8 of an inch or so. You want that parallel again, so it'll fit over a jam chuck. And again, you could use a carbide scraper. Round, certainly hollowing out the inside along the bottom. I would not want to use this for bringing up the wall, because you've got a rounded surface, and I think you can get a more likely to get parallel if you used a square edge scraper. And certainly a square edge scraper can work. Got to lower this a little bit so we can cut it at or slightly above center. But you can certainly get that wall parallel with a scraper. And another choice of coming in, and this will give you a similar result. This is what Richard Raffin uses. He uses basically a square bar with the side cut back, similar to the way it's cut back on a box scraper, but he uses a square, or rather rectangular style bar. That's a conventional scraper, and he literally wrote the book on how to turn a box, so that's certainly a reasonable alternative. Now, if you're doing the inside of a round box where it's curved and you got to get behind this flange, a hook nose scraper such as this can work fine to come in there. Another choice is the carbide, a cupped carbide tool, which is not a scraper but a slicer, and I tend to use this occasionally when I have especially difficult woods, because it can do a really nice job. You keep
You don't have to maneuver it anyway, because normally it's got a drop cut and a shape. In this particular Viceroy, it's cut back in here, so I can use it to get behind that rim. Jimmy Clues has a tool that also uses the cupped carbide, which I think I might prefer to this one because it's a little flatter and it's a little wider, so it's a little more stable base than this one. And certainly you can grind your own hooked scraper. A conventional shape with a flat top is going to be a little more aggressive, and which has its pros and cons. This one's a little bit smaller. I've turned this into a negative rake for doing refined cuts when I need to come in behind the rim and some other cuts. And that fourth need for a scraper is going to be cleaning up the bottom and developing that transition in that lower edge. My preference for most boxes is to have a rounded corner in the back. In the back. It's not right or wrong, it's just my preference. I find it easier to grab things out of the box, and it's also easier to make that transition with less likelihood of a catch. And for that I would use some type of start off with a conventional round nose scraper that I can come across the bottom and get into that corner like this. And then if I want a tool a little less aggressive, I've got one a little bit smaller that's a negative rake. Now, if you're using carbide tools, there's certainly nothing wrong with using that round nose scraper. You're going to find this is less likely to get you in trouble than a square. If you get that square scraper in there and you're aggressively cutting on the side and the bottom, because these are 90 degrees, you're going to get a good likelihood of getting a catch, and that's why most box scrapers, and I use this sometimes to come along the bottom to clean it up, it's less than 90 degrees, so I can scrape along the bottom with this leading edge and not have the scraper cutting on two surfaces simultaneously, which tends to ensure a catch if you do scrape on two sides simultaneously. But the round nose can flat scraper can certainly work. Good use of a carbide for that particular task. But it's not one that would justify using carbide for me, because I'm using conventional for everything else, so I tend to keep them all one and the same. Now, the time when you might want to have a square bottom is a pencil pot, but it's not a box. But you want that clean shoulder so your pencils will all stack up in there. But again, for a box, you don't necessarily want that square shoulder. If I want something close to it, I can generally get there with that box scraper with that slightly rounded edge, just sweeping in from the side. Without much of a risk of getting both edges cutting at the same time, because again, this is less than 90 degrees. So you can hollow the bottom of the box, or in this case, as I'll illustrate in this lid, with certainly a round carbide scraper, typically held flat. And it allows you to get in close to the corner for a rounded shoulder. Adjust this down a little bit. And if you like carbide, this may be the perfect ticket for you. I just, again, prefer conventional tools because I see no advantage of this over a round nose scraper. For me.
If you want to learn more about box making, you might want to check out my playlist. It's got about 45 different videos on turning boxes, and you can click on a playlist and go right down the list and see which ones you're interested in watching. Your comments are important to me, so leave them below. You remember, y'all stay safe. Come on back, you hear?